The moment I saw the two police officers walking toward me with handcuffs in their hands, I knew something was terribly wrong. I was standing in the front yard of my own home phone in hand, halfway through updating my Wi-Fi settings when they arrived. One officer, tall and broad-shouldered, stopped just a few feet away. "Ma'am," he said with a firm voice, "can you tell us what you're doing here?" My stomach dropped. I glanced at my house, then back at him. "I live here," I replied. "I'm just changing my Wi-Fi password." He didn't lower the handcuffs. The second officer hovered a few steps behind her eyes, scanning me like I was a suspect in a crime scene. In a way, I guess I was, because someone had called 911 on me. The report said I was acting suspiciously. What was I doing standing outside tapping on my phone? That's it. The 911 caller, who turned out to be my neighbor Melanie, apparently thought that was threatening enough to summon armed officers to my doorstep. She didn't mention the fact that I'd lived in this house for 3 years, that I always kept to myself, paid my taxes, trimmed my hedges. No. All she saw was a black woman standing outside focused on her phone, and that to her looked like a crime. I was angry, I was embarrassed, but most of all I was confused. "I'm just changing my password," I told the officers again, forcing myself to stay calm. "Someone's been using my network without permission." One of them, Detective Navarro, nodded slowly but didn't relax. "Do you have proof?" "Yes." I held out my phone and pulled up my router settings. I showed them the list of connected devices. There were only a few. I recognized my phone, my laptop, and my smart TV, but one stood out. Crestwood ISO-1. It didn't belong to me. "See this," I said. "That's the one I don't recognize." Navarro raised an eyebrow. "And it's been connected for how long days? Maybe longer." They exchanged a glance, and I knew then this was no longer just a routine check. This was something deeper, something darker. Officer Carter leaned in. "Can you access the activity logs?" I nodded and mirrored the router data to my laptop inside the house. We stood around my dining table as I clicked through the tabs. That's when everything shifted. The unknown device Crestwood I-01 wasn't just using my internet. It was accessing my security cameras. My chest tightened. "Someone's been watching me," I whispered. Officer Navarro took a step forward. "Are you sure?" I scrolled down the logs and my heart dropped again. It wasn't just my cameras. Multiple IP addresses had been flagged. They'd been accessing camera feeds from other houses in the neighborhood. "Wait," Melanie gasped from behind us. She'd followed us in, still clinging to the idea that I was the problem, but now her voice was trembling. "What do you mean other houses?" I didn't say anything. I just clicked on the next feed. It was a dimly lit hallway, then a living room, then a bedroom. All of it looked familiar. Melanie covered her mouth. "Oh my God. That's my house." The silence in the room was deafening. No one said a word. I turned to her slowly. "You called the police on me for changing my password, while someone was watching you sleep at night." Officer Carter's expression turned grim. "This isn't just a prank. This is felony-level surveillance." Detective Navarro pulled out his radio and called for cybercrime backup. I stood there, numb, watching Melanie, the same woman who tried to have me arrested, now shaken to her core. And yet this was only the beginning, because when I traced the signal, I discovered the source wasn't across town. It was just a few houses down the block. I zoomed in on the network log and highlighted the source IP. The data traffic wasn't being routed to some foreign server or even across state lines. It was local. Very local. "It's coming from just down the street," I said, turning my laptop toward Officer Navarro. He leaned in, eyes narrowing. "You can trace it to a specific address," I nodded, pulling up signal strength readings and connection timestamps. The router logs had enough information to triangulate the source. I matched them against a neighborhood map I had pulled up on another tab. My stomach sank when I saw the match. Melanie was still standing behind me, arms crossed tight across her chest, but her face had lost all color. I looked at her. "Does Brandon live with you?" She blinked. "Brandon, my nephew." Her voice cracked. "He's upstairs right now." Navarro's jaw tightened. Officer Carter stepped forward. "We need to speak with him. Now." Melanie hesitated, visibly torn between defending her family and acknowledging the weight of the evidence. I could see it in her eyes, the internal war. She wanted to believe this was all a mistake, that her sweet, quiet nephew wasn't capable of something so invasive. But deep down, she already knew. She led the officers out of my house and down the sidewalk to her own, which sat 4 houses away. I followed a few steps behind, but Navarro turned to me as we reached her porch. "You stay here." "No way," I replied. "I uncovered this." "I'm not sitting back now." He hesitated, then nodded once. "Stay out of the way, but you can observe." Melanie opened the front door with trembling hands. "Brandon?" She called, her voice thin. "Can you come down for a minute?" There was no answer. Officer Carter put a hand to her sidearm. "We're going up." The house was quiet, too quiet. Each creaking stair under their boots sent a chill through my spine. Melanie and I waited at the bottom while the officers moved up the hallway. Then a faint sound, chair legs scraping the floor. Footsteps. Tension cracked through the air like static. "Brandon, this is the police." "Open the door," Navarro ordered. A pause. Then the door opened slowly. Brandon stood in the doorway wearing sweatpants and a hoodie. He looked surprised, but not scared. His fingers twitched at his sides, small, nervous movements. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice tight. Navarro didn't flinch. "We have reason to believe you've been accessing private home security feeds from this neighborhood. Would you like to explain?" That Brandon's face shifted slightly, just enough to notice a flicker of guilt or panic. He tried to laugh. "That's insane. I don't even know how to do that." Carter wasn't amused. "Mind if we take a look at your laptop?" He hesitated. "Do you have a warrant?" Navarro stepped closer. "We can get one. But this is your chance to come clean." For a moment, silence. Then Brandon sighed and rubbed his forehead. "Okay, look. I wasn't trying to hurt anyone." Melanie's hand flew to her chest. "Brandon." He glanced at her, then looked away. "I was just messing around," he said, voice low. "It started as a joke. I wanted to see if I could get into someone's Wi-Fi." Navarro snapped. "So you admit it?" Brandon nodded slowly. "Yeah. But then I saw the cameras, and I got curious." Carter's voice dropped. Curious or obsessed, Brandon didn't answer. He stared at the floor. Navarro's tone hardened. "How many houses did you watch?" he whispered. "I don't know." Melanie backed against the wall, shaking her head. "I trusted you. I took you in. Fed you. And you." Brandon turned toward her. "I didn't mean for it to go this far, I swear. It didn't matter." Officer Carter pulled out the handcuffs. "Brandon Foster, you're under arrest for unlawful surveillance and unauthorized access to computer systems." As the cuffs clicked around his wrists, Brandon didn't resist. He didn't even look up. I stood there silent, watching the boy she'd once defended as just quiet, being led away like a criminal. Because that's exactly what he had become. The patrol car door slammed shut with a sharp metallic echo as Officer Carter secured Brandon in the back seat. Melanie stood on her porch, frozen arms wrapped around herself like she could hold in the pieces of her collapsing world. I stayed a few feet away, the early evening breeze brushing against my skin. Part of me wanted to gloat. After all, she had called the police on me for changing my Wi-Fi password. She'd humiliated me in front of my neighbors, made me feel like a criminal in my own yard. And now, the real criminal had been living under her roof all along. Detective Navarro turned toward me, his voice low but clear. "You were right. If you hadn't caught it, we wouldn't have known." I didn't say anything. I just looked at Melanie. She still couldn't meet my eyes. Finally, she spoke. "I was wrong about you." Her voice was raw, hollow. "I judged you without knowing anything." "Yeah," I said quietly. "You did. It should have felt like vindication. But it didn't, because the damage was already done." By the time the second squad car arrived with cybercrime investigators, neighbors had started to emerge from their houses, drawn by the flashing lights and the unmistakable tension in the air. Whispers spread fast. "What's going on? Did something happen to Brandon? Why are there so many cops?" I stood there, arms crossed, letting it all unfold. A few people who had never spoken to me before gave me cautious glances. Curiosity mixed with something else. Was it shame, guilt, hard to say. One of the investigators approached me. "Ma'am, we may need access to your system logs and router data for further analysis." I nodded. "Anything you need. It's all on my laptop." They followed me back to my house. Melanie didn't come along. She sat down on her porch step like her legs could no longer carry the weight of what had happened. Inside, I pulled up the logs again for the officers and handed over a flash drive I'd used to back up everything. The lead tech scrolled through my screen with growing alarm. Jesus. These aren't just camera pings. This kid was capturing stills, recording snippets, storing timestamps. I clenched my jaw. He was building a file. They spent the next 2 hours digging deeper, cross-referencing addresses, identifying compromised households, and tracing more connections back to Brandon's setup. Turns out he hadn't just stopped with me or Melanie. He'd breached at least 7 homes in the neighborhood, exploiting weak passwords or cloned network names to trick people into connecting their devices. A fake Wi-Fi hotspot. A classic man-in-the-middle attack. And no one, not a single one of those families, had known they were being watched. The worst part, some of those homes had kids. Officer Carter walked back over her expression grim. He recorded footage from one child's bedroom, she said, almost unable to meet my eyes. I swallowed hard, my anger rising all over again. This wasn't some harmless tech prank. This was perverse. A betrayal of trust, privacy, safety. And it could have continued, would have continued, if I hadn't noticed a slowdown in my streaming. As the night deepened and the investigation team packed up their gear, I sat alone on my front steps. The blue and red lights were finally fading. The crowd had gone inside. And Melanie. She never looked over again. I stared at the stars overhead, trying to shake the weight off my chest. I should have felt safe, relieved. But instead, all I could think about was how quickly things could go wrong. How easily a neighbor's bias could turn into a 911 call. How easily a bored college student could turn into a predator behind a screen. And how fragile our sense of privacy really is. When Officer Carter walked back toward her cruiser, she paused beside me. "You did the right thing, you know." I looked up at her. "No, I just did what anyone should have done." She gave a tight nod. "That's the problem. Not enough people do." And with that, she was gone. The neighborhood had always watched me like I didn't belong. Now they'd have to watch themselves, because the truth had been hiding right next door all along. The next morning, the neighborhood was quieter than usual. No lawnmowers, no early dog walkers, just the sound of wind chimes clinking faintly in the breeze and the occasional car door shutting gently, like people were afraid of making noise. I stood in my kitchen sipping lukewarm coffee from a chipped mug. I hadn't slept much. My mind kept replaying the same images, Brandon's flat expression as the cuffs clicked shut, Melanie's trembling hands, and the way the other neighbors looked at me like I'd somehow changed overnight. I hadn't. They had. By noon, there was a knock at my door. I glanced through the peephole and felt my stomach twist. It was Melanie. Her face was pale. She held a foil-wrapped dish in her hands, something old-fashioned like she thought food could undo what had been done. I opened the door, but only halfway. She looked down, then up again. Her voice was soft. I brought you something. A casserole. I thought maybe..." Her words faded into the awkward silence between us. I didn't invite her in. I didn't take the dish. Instead, I waited. "I was wrong," she finally said. "I was so wrong about you." I folded my arms. "You mean when you called the police on me for using my own phone in my own yard?" Her eyes welled with tears. "I didn't mean for it to go that far. I thought I was protecting the neighborhood. I almost laughed, but it wasn't funny. You protected the wrong people." She nodded slowly. "I know that now. I thought you were the outsider. I never even considered that Brandon..." Her voice cracked. "You didn't consider a lot of things," I said quietly. "Like the fact that bias doesn't always look like hate, it sometimes looks like fear or judgment dressed up as concern." She reached out slightly as if to hand me the casserole again. I didn't move. "I'm not here for food," I told her. "And I'm not here for an apology either." She blinked. "Then what can I do?" I looked her dead in the eye. You can do better. Melanie stood there for a moment longer. Then she placed the dish gently on the porch. Railing turned and walked away. I didn't pick it up. The neighborhood's group chat blew up later that day. People were suddenly realizing how vulnerable they'd been. Some were angry, some were in denial. And a few tried to shift blame to Melanie calling her irresponsible for housing her nephew. But none of them acknowledged the deeper truth. They'd all ignored me, quietly, tolerated me on the fringe of their social bubble, until someone assumed I was the threat. Then suddenly they had plenty to say. Now that the real danger had worn a familiar face, they didn't know what to do. That night, I received a letter in my mailbox. No return address, no name. Just my name handwritten in cursive across the envelope. Inside was a note. You were right, and I'm sorry for how we treated you. Please don't think we're all like that. Some of us are trying to change. It was signed only a neighbor. I sat on the edge of my couch holding that letter for a long time. Not because I needed the apology, but because I needed to know someone saw me for who I really was and not what they feared I might be. 2 days later, a cybercrime task force gave an official statement to local news. Brandon had installed surveillance software on at least 8 home networks using a spoofed Wi-Fi signal. He'd accessed over a dozen live camera feeds, bedrooms, living rooms, even nurseries. The community was stunned. They all knew him. That quiet college kid with the laptop who barely made eye contact? Turns out silence doesn't always mean innocence. Sometimes it hides the worst things. By the end of the week, neighbors had changed their Wi-Fi passwords, upgraded routers, and bought new security cameras. But I didn't need stronger passwords. I needed stronger community. The kind that didn't look at people like me and see suspicion. The kind that didn't wait for a crisis to realize who belonged. And while they scrambled to protect their homes, I simply reclaimed my peace. I didn't need their approval. I had my voice. And this time the whole neighborhood had heard it. A week after Brandon's arrest, the neighborhood had gone back to pretending. Lawns were mowed, dogs were walked, sprinklers clicked rhythmically on front lawns as if nothing had happened. But something had, and it left a mark. Not on the streets or the houses, on the people, and on me. For a while, I thought about selling the house, packing up and leaving Crestwood behind, finding a place where I didn't have to wonder if someone was watching me, judging me, second-guessing my every move. But then I realized something this happens everywhere. Different streets, different names, same assumptions. If I left now, it wouldn't just be running from the trauma, it would be surrendering to it. And I've done enough shrinking for other people's comfort. So I stayed. People were more polite now, waved more often, smiled longer than necessary, but it wasn't connection. It was guilt in disguise. They weren't reaching out to build bridges. They were trying to patch over the cracks in their conscience with pleasantries. I didn't hate them for it, but I didn't pretend it was enough. One afternoon, I was watering the small flower bed beneath my front window when a woman I'd never spoken to before approached. She looked to be in her 50s, gray roots showing under a messy bun, gardening gloves in one hand, a nervous smile on her face. I just wanted to say, she began, that I didn't know. About Brandon. About what he was doing. I nodded, unsure what to say. She paused. And I'm sorry no one stood up for you sooner. That should never have happened. That time I answered. You're right. It shouldn't have. She didn't argue, just nodded again and walked away. It wasn't the apology that mattered, it was the honesty. She didn't sugarcoat it, didn't deflect. And that somehow meant more than the casseroles or the group chat posts full of performative concern. Melanie put her house up for sale 3 weeks later. Rumor was she couldn't bear to stay after what happened. Her nephew had violated the entire block's sense of safety and her own. She left quietly. No farewell party, no goodbyes. I watched the moving truck pull away from behind my curtains. Part of me felt a twinge of sympathy. But I reminded myself she was never really the victim. She had power. She used it recklessly. And now she was facing the consequences of assumptions that could have ended much worse for me. As for Brandon, he was charged with multiple counts of unlawful surveillance, digital trespassing, and unauthorized access to personal data. He took a plea deal: community service, probation, mandatory counseling. A slap on the wrist, if you ask me. But at least his face was on record. At least the silence was broken. I started writing about the experience, not just for myself, but for others. I wrote blog posts, recorded voice memos, even sat down in front of my phone camera and told my story aloud one day. That video went viral. People from all over the country left comments. This happened to my son. I got profiled at work for doing absolutely nothing. Thank you for speaking up. I thought I was the only one. Turns out my story wasn't unique. And that's exactly why I had to tell it. So if you're still listening, here's what I want you to remember. Watch your surroundings, but more importantly, watch your biases. That strange neighbor might just be someone protecting herself. That quiet college kid might not be so innocent. And that split-second assumption could end someone's peace or worse, their life. We live in a world wired for connection, yet so quick to divide. So before you call the cops on someone for standing in their own yard, ask yourself what you're really afraid of. If this story made you feel something, if it opened your eyes even a little, don't let it stop here. Like, share, and subscribe to hear more real stories like this one, told from the inside from the people who lived it. Drop a comment below. Have you ever been misjudged for simply existing? I want to hear your voice. And remember, awareness is the first step to change. Because stories like mine, they're not rare. They're just rarely told.